I want to start this off with a quick content warning. There's some stuff that happens without characters' consent, particularly a fair amount of drugging, of course, and also some sexual stuff that happens with dubious consent in this book, and there will be some discussion of that. So, take care of yourselves. If that's not a discussion you want to hear, don't listen to it. I'll see you next time. She bought another coffee and returned to her sofa, wondering where the line lay between consent and abuse. What exactly you called this muddy area of resentful tolerance. Worn down by pushiness and persistence and inevitable eventual arousal. It seemed to her that with consent, like anything else a person wished to extract from another, be it money, forgiveness, personal property, anything at all you had to do was chip away for long enough, and you would get there in the end. Consent not so much volunteered as exhaustedly submitted, as a bargain in exchange for a bit of peace. Up there, in the bed, Elaine lay in waiting. She knew that no nastiness stemmed from it, and sighed at her own tragic magnetism. "I can't get enough of you," Elaine often whimpered, head down, eyes up, tongue out, the words slobbered and mumbled as she lapped like her gums were swollen. And she clung on with those two massive hands as Francis looked to the heavens beyond the lampshade and let it happen, the terrible orgasm betraying her. Francis tried to picture Elaine differently now, glassy-eyed, drugged to a limp oblivion, and she pictured coming and going as she pleased. She could shower in peace. She could lie in. She might even be nice to her, stroke her clammy forehead, bring her drinks, which would sit untouched on the bedside cabinet. A suitable drug should be easy enough to procure. Sedatives of all varieties were Dom's specialty, and he usually had them ready at a moment's notice. Now she had promised him the money, he might be willing to help. In this way Francis might survive the rest of the week without resorting to violence. Then she could pay Dom back, and finally be rid of Elaine once and for all. Hello, friends and enemies. Welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. Today, I want to do a quick discussion of a book I just read. That's Sedating Elaine by Dawn Winter. This is a new literary fiction novel. It just came out last month, I think. Maybe this month. Time is meaningless. And I'd been looking forward to it for a while. The advanced reviews were good, and it just seemed like the kind of thing that I would enjoy. When it comes to this sort of disturbing twilight zone of a literary novel, something along the lines of the concept of my year of rest and relaxation, I'm always looking for the next thing that's just gonna really work for me. And I kind of thought that this would be it. As the title and the passage I read suggest, Sedating Elaine is about a young woman, Frances, who invites her well-off girlfriend, Elaine, to move in with her, even though she doesn't actually like her very much, and decides that in order to live with Elaine until she can extract the money she needs from her, she should sedate her. Great premise. And, yeah, I've already mentioned it's literary fiction, so you've probably already guessed that the author fumbles that premise. I want to quickly apologize to Dawn Winter, the author. This is her debut novel, and she does some pretty good stuff in it. There were parts I really liked, and overall, I found it to be something of a page turner, which is pretty impressive for a meditative literary novel like this. And I don't know if I'm not too burned by the terrible ending of this book. I might well check out the next thing she has to offer because I do think that she is a talented writer in a lot of ways. So, yeah, Miss Winter, I'm not trying to come for you. I'm starting to suspect I don't like literary fiction very much. But so Sedating Elaine. The main character's name is Frances, and she is a disaster. She is deeply hung up on her emotionally abusive ex girlfriend. She lives alone and in a small apartment and gets high in all of her free time and works as a dishwasher at a restaurant that wants her to be a line cook, but she is afraid of doing any more than the bare minimum, so she constantly refuses the promotion. Um, all of that's pretty relatable, and I think Frances is an interesting character because despite the fact that she's relatable, she's also creepy as hell, and I feel like for most of the book, Winter walks a really interesting line between those. It's kind of uncanny because you'll sympathize with her, even empathize with her one moment, and then the next moment you'll be like, what the hell? One good example of this is that Frances's love of cooking comes through in a bizarre obsession with soup. Like, she's obsessed with making soup. She is constantly daydreaming about making soup. It's creepy. It's unnerving. She just like her mind drifts to the concept of soup all the time. Let me give you a sampling here. This is fucking unhinged. Onions, garlic, chili. They hissed and sizzled in the pot as she chopped the carrots one by one from the bag. How she loved making soup. The simple act of transformation from ingredient to meal, whole hard globe of onion turned to delectable translucent slivers. It was like sorcery. The freedom of flinging in herbs, the earthy colors of turmeric, paprika, coriander, and the fixability of almost any mixture. Learning from experience how to balance flavor, season blandness, and sweeten or spice up as one desired, turning each pot of humble beginnings into a bowl of absolute comfort. Glimmering noodle soups, sweet onion soups, garlic soups, bean soups, and any number with an egg plopped or poached inside. Like so many people who struggle, Frances sought solace in food. It had long been her escape, ever since she was a child heating up tinned cream of tomato on the stove, sprinkling in broken crisps as makeshift croutons. For some people, the comfort is in the eating. For others, in extravagance, lobsters and caviar and filet steaks. For many, the reassuring control of denial, but for Frances, the real pleasure was in the cooking. Enveloped in the scent of roasted garlic, cloves plump and pouting to be plucked, she found more relaxation than most do in the hottest, headiest rose garden. It's like that every time she thinks about soup. It gets it gets uncanny. Okay, so weird little soup obsessed gremlin Frances has been dating Elaine, who is a wealthy, robust, privileged, joyful person who is obsessed with sex to a perhaps also somewhat distressing degree, and who fell in love very quickly with Frances in what Frances thought was clearly a rebound dating scenario, but because Frances is a mess and not very good at saying no, she has ended up in a somewhat serious relationship with Elaine. And, yeah, Frances is deeply in debt to her drug dealer, and even though they are more or less friends, He is still at the point where he feels the need to send enforcers after her if she doesn't pay him back immediately. And so, in her desperation, Frances asks Elaine to move in with her so she can extract rent money that she can use to pay her drug dealer. Um, but she is distressed by the very idea of living with Elaine even for a couple of days. And as in the passage that I read at the beginning of this video, that leads to her decision to sedate Elaine for the weekend it will take to get the money. I mean, we're horror readers over here. We like disturbing, distressing books. We like thrillers and books about descents into madness and all of that. And this seems like it's gonna be one of those. So my question is, how did she mess this up? Okay, this is definitely not a book where you should be reading for the plot, but I'm gonna spoil the plot. So if you really intend to read this and you don't want it spoiled for you, I'm not gonna judge. Go away. Come watch this when you've read it. That's fine. But Frances makes the mistake of sedating Elaine before Elaine actually puts things in motion to give her the money she needs, meaning that she intends to keep Elaine sedated until her debt is paid off, but she can't pay her debt off while Elaine is sedated. Really good, kind of pressurized scenario for a character development based story. But essentially, what happens in the end is just that the drug dealer and enforcer come into the apartment. Elaine has just started to wake up. She realizes what's going on, pays the drug dealer, who leaves, and forgives Frances. Okay. So I'm being a little dishonest here. What we're supposed to see as the emotional arc of this novel is that Frances, whose father is dead and who never knew her mother, but whose father on his deathbed gave her her mother's address in case she ever wants to meet her, is dealing with feelings of abandonment that we're supposed to see as having influenced her to become the bad decision machine that she is today. I think it's a little bit reductive and honestly kind of puerile to blame all of Frances's personality on her parents and on I mean there's an incident in her past where a neighborhood child died in her presence that she and her father both felt guilty for not preventing, and that we're supposed to see as having driven a wedge between them and caused her inability to connect with other people. Again, it's a very reductive way of creating a person. Frances is fascinating in a bad way because she loses complexity over the course of the novel. I liked Frances much better when I couldn't figure out why on earth she would act the way she did than when the author had gone out of her way to explain all of her actions in some sort of linear teleological trauma based. Ugh. So, Elaine is angry when she realizes she's been sedated and why, and also that Frances cheated on her, which is pretty incidental to the plot. Um, but we never see her anger. There is no dialogue between Elaine and Frances after Elaine wakes up. We're just supposed to accept that Frances explained and Elaine went through her anger and came back around to forgiving her. Which Of all the ways that I imagined this book could end, and I assumed that Elaine would die because it's implied that Frances got the dosage of the medication wrong for most of the book. So I assumed that Elaine would die or that Frances would end up in trouble. But no, no, all of that is hand waved away, and Elaine befriends Frances after taking some time away to heal. And the depth of betrayal and the fact that Elaine could easily have died and Frances wasn't all that concerned about it is never addressed. It just isn't. The ending of the book is Elaine convincing Frances to go to the seaside town where her mother resides and finally to meet her. And the last moment of the book is Frances being hugged by her mother. I just, it's like 2/3 of this book were a pretty good literary thriller about a woman who had dug herself a hole so deep she couldn't get out. And the last third became one of those obnoxious, sentimental literary tearjerkers. Where did that come from? Well, I do have a theory. And it's a theory honed by a fair amount of experience and bitterness in writing workshops. Granted, I didn't go to any really prestigious writing workshops, but I've done some at the university level, and my experience has been that resolution for your characters is something that a group of other writers will always try to extract from you. If you try to leave an ending open, or even make an ending particularly sad, your decisions are going to be questioned mercilessly. It's certainly one of those things that a lot of creative writing professors seem to think you have to earn, although they never exactly explain how to earn it. So I imagined, when I got to the ending of this book, I imagined Dawn Winter sitting in a room full of other students and a professor or two, and being asked what Frances's trauma was, why she was like this, how she could heal. Which isn't the question. Well, it is a question the novel asks, but it's not the question. It's not the interesting question. It's not the question at the center of the novel. The question at the center of the novel is, depending on how you look at it, either how could one person do this to another, or if we were going to go with the Elaine wakes up and eventually forgives Frances angle, how could a person reconcile that being done to them by a person they care about? Neither of those questions is ever really addressed. It's a book that could have had so much depth. It could have been so arresting, and it took an easy out into cliched character beats that, were already pretty exhausting in like the 1940s. I don't care if your mother abandoned you. That's not an excuse to roofie your girlfriend for drug money. I I know a lot of people who had very bad parents and or were very lonely growing up or have trauma or a hard time connecting with other people. A lot of these people are my close friends, and literally zero of them have ever drugged another person without their consent. Not doing that isn't that hard. So I am not as willing to forgive Frances as the narrative is. And I don't think that a redemption arc was called for, It's certainly not something I desired, and I have a hard time imagining that most people that pick this book up are looking for that. I just don't think this book is written with the reader's pleasure in mind, and that is something that I think a lot of young literary fiction writers miss out on because the writing workshop focuses on the craft so much. You rarely hear anyone talk about the reader's pleasure, and I think that often leads to a book that doesn't consider its own purpose. A book that, especially a debut novel, a book that exists to prove that someone can do a certain kind of writing, regardless of whether anybody asked for that. And I think it's a shame because Sedating Elaine started out like a really interesting book. And maybe I'm being too generous to Dawn Winter by blaming the fumbled ending on social pressure, but I do think there is an idea of the literary novel that doesn't help anyone or please anyone, and I think ultimately trying to conform to that is probably what ruined this book. It's also a huge shame because the cover design, pretty solid. Honestly, this cover deserved better. Anyway, if anybody else has read this book, let me know what you thought, or if you plan to. I would love to hear updates. If you think I'm wrong, please, please tell me. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Okay. I need like a sign out. People have sign outs, right? That's a thing.